All right. We are at the top of the hour. Welcome, everyone, to this Leader Factor webinar. It has been a good while since our last one. Tim, how does it feel to be back on the webinar train and live with a global audience?
Oh man, it's fantastic. There's nothing like live. So
There's
glad to be
nothing
back.
like live. Beirut, Geneva, Syracuse, London, Hamburg, San Diego, everywhere.
Oh, there was a classic one here, Junior. Someone said it's a beautiful day in South Africa.
I
Someone
love it.
else said I'm visiting Earth. So welcome from wherever you're coming from. We're
Yeah, and
happy
for
to have
those
you.
extraterrestrials out there who want to learn a little bit more how to engage with humans, I guess this is the right
That's
webinar.
right. We have
Talk a little bit about
Bangalore, we have
EQ.
Barcelona, we have Lisbon, we have Beirut, we have Istanbul, we have Prague. Wow. A global
Amazing.
audience today. So good to be with everyone.
Yeah, thank you all for spending your time with us today. We know it's just an hour, but that hour you could spend elsewhere. You could be doing a lot of different things. For many of you, you could be sleeping. So we appreciate the sacrifice and the effort that you've made to be with us today. If you've attended a Leader Factor webinar in the past, please let us know in the chat. And if you haven't, please let us know how you first learned about Leader Factor. We would be very interested to hear. So our topic today, the future of emotional intelligence. And we're here to tell you that it is a bright one. It is a bright future. We're very grateful for the opportunity that we have to be here. And I'd like to go off and start with some introductions. So my name's Junior. I'm the COO here at Leader Factor. And co-hosting with me today is Dr. Tim Clark. Many of you know Tim. Tim's an organizational anthropologist. Many of you know him as the author of The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. He earned his PhD at Oxford University and is the founder and CEO of our organization, Leader Factor. And we believe here at Leader Factor that leaders are the most important factor in any outcome. And importantly, that anyone can be a leader. So what's our agenda today? What are we talking about and where are we going? Today, we're going to talk about EQ, what it is. We'll talk about what's wrong with EQ in the current landscape. And we're going to finish by talking about what we can do to fix it and what specifically we at Leader Factor are going to do to fix it. And very last, we'll move into the giveaway relevant to everyone here today. You may have seen it teased. You may have seen it in the newsletter, on social. We're going to give you the full details at the end of today's conversation. So
It's a
Tim, how
good
are you
one too.
feeling? How are you
It's a
feeling as we begin?
fantastic. And by the way, the giveaway, it's a good one.
It's a good one.
It's a good one.
We have done, I don't know how many dozens of webinars, and I don't think that it's an overstatement to say that this is far and away the best giveaway that we have ever done. So stick around. It's more than a book. It's less than a car. That's what I'll tell you.
It's just right in the middle.
Yeah.
Right in the middle.
We will also be saving the last 10 minutes or so for Q&A. So if you have a question now or during the webinar, go ahead and throw it in the Q&A form, and we will get to as many of those as we can. And as a reminder, when you use the chat today, please ensure that you've selected that the chat go to everyone, panelists and attendees, so that everyone can see it. So with that backdrop, let's go ahead and dive in. We want to start off with a question that I would love for everyone to go ahead and answer in the chat. The question is, what is emotional intelligence? I want to see what we think. What are our definitions today?
Empathy, awareness, being intelligent about emotions, self and other awareness. Okay, good, good. Oh, wow. We're blowing up here, Junior. We're blowing up.
We're rocking the chat.
The
Thanks everybody
ability
for
to
participating.
self-reflect, listening, putting yourself in someone other's shoes, self-control. What's catching your eye here, Junior?
Reading between the lines. Jane says spidey senses. Love that. Tom, overall self-control, aligning multiple people's perceptions to a combined reality. These are amazing definitions. And I also want to acknowledge the fact, look at the chat. We have people from everywhere contributing, and just think every single one of these entries is a human somewhere on the planet, or maybe not on the planet, tuning in. And that to me is amazing. What a cool opportunity. There's
I,
so much to be learned from this.
Junior, I love this one. Human skills supporting humans.
Mm.
It's really nicely done.
Yeah, these are great. These are great. Take notes, everyone. So, if you Google that question, what is emotional intelligence? You'll get something like this: the ability to understand, to manage, and use your own emotions in positive ways to relieve stress, communicate effectively, empathize with others, overcome challenges, and diffuse conflict. That's actually exactly what I got
Can you say
when I
that again?
Googled the definition, right? So there are a lot of definitions that float around about emotional intelligence, and we want to tell you what our take is. Tim, what's our take?
Yeah, our take is this. This is a consolidated definition. The ability to interact effectively with other humans. That's it. Now, you all just identified all kinds of elements that are part of the definition, but what is this in service of? Everything is in service of the ability to interact effectively with other humans. That's the essence of the concept, really. Now, there are, as we said, long clinical academic definitions all over the place, and there are multiple dimensions, which we're going to get into, that are a part of emotional intelligence as a construct. But this is what it's all about.
Yep. And effectiveness, we're going to unpack that. So we'll dive deeper into this. It's hard to capture all of it in a single sentence, but we found this to be pretty practical. So anywhere there are humans, there should be emotional intelligence. It governs the quality of our interactions. And so that should be self-evident as to why it's so important. So have any of you been in situations where emotional intelligence was low? Have you been in situations like that? What was that like? While you're putting that in there, we're going to dive into some of the history of emotional intelligence and understand that this is not comprehensive. We could put a lot of nodes on this timeline, but we've chosen to put just a few. So let's jump into the history. Many of the timelines that you'll see regarding EQ, they start in 1990, and they don't look at some pieces of information that we think are pretty important. So pay attention as we go through these nodes on the timeline, because we're going to be quoting some additional definitions of emotional intelligence. And we want you to perk up and pay attention to whether or not you think that these are complete definitions or what you might add, what you might take away. So emotional intelligence has been around as long as humans have, but it wasn't until the 20th century that it became a formal research topic. So the first bullet on here, 1920, Edward Thorndike introduces the idea of social intelligence. So here's a quote from him: the ability to understand and manage men and women and boys and girls to act wisely in human relations. Act wisely in human relations. So his perspective is it's equivalent to interpersonal intelligence, one of the types of intelligence identified in Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, and pretty closely related to theory of mind. Tim, what do you think about this definition?
Well, it's pretty amazing. It's over 100 years old, right?
Yeah.
1920. So this is a very important antecedent to the current study of emotional intelligence, and he gives us quite a bit of insight.
Yep. And thank you for everyone's comments in the chat as I'm going through and reading these out of the corner of my eye. We've all had experiences where emotional intelligence has been low. 64, Michael Beldock published a paper titled Sensitivity to Expression of Emotional Meaning in Three Modes of Communication. Go ahead and read that. 1990, Peter Salovey, John Mayer published an article in Imagination, Cognition, and Personality. Here's their definition, quote, the ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions, to discriminate among them, and to use this information to guide one's thinking and action. So again, different take. 95, we have Goleman. Tim, tell us about Goleman.
Well, Daniel Goleman was a science writer for the New York Times, but he's also a psychologist. He's a trained psychologist. And so he published the book, Emotional Intelligence, which was really a synthesis of the research that had been done up until that time, and it became an international bestseller. It really captured the interest and the imagination of people all over the world.
And then a few years ago, the World Economic Forum named EQ a top 10 skill for the workforce of 2020. So that's a little bit of the history regarding emotional intelligence. Let's move on to another important point. Tim, tell me about this slide.
Well, this is a controversy that I think we've put to bed. Uh, I think we have, and the controversy, or at least the question was, what is emotional intelligence? Is it a fixed trait or is it a learnable skill? Now, why does this matter? Well, because what we've come to understand is that personality is more of a fixed trait and emotional intelligence is more of a learnable skill. So with personality, if you take a personality assessment, how many of you have ever taken a personality assessment? Probably most all of us. What do you learn? You learn who you are. You learn more about who you are, insights about your personality, right? But emotional intelligence tells you who you can become. It's a learnable skill. Basic temperament and disposition, it can change a little bit over time. And there's an entire research literature around that that says that personality, the fundamental traits of personality, remain relatively fixed over time. But guess what? That's not true about emotional intelligence. We have an avalanche of data. We have research with children, with adolescents, and with adults that helps us understand that emotional intelligence, you can grow that, you can increase that to a much higher level than what you may have today. That's very important to understand. So we're dealing with a learnable skill rather than a fixed trait.
So let's read some of these chats. Tanya, learnable skill always. Kelly, they got to be ready to fix it. I like that. Toxicity interferes with emotional intelligence. Leanne, it's learnable. Learnable skill built on top of existing traits. Love that. Mariana, more effective if learned in childhood. IQ fixed, EQ learnable. Learnable if you want it to be. Love
That's
that.
right.
Right. And it looks like many of you have taken personality tests. There are some interesting ones out there. Okay, let's look at this from a different angle. One of the ways that we like to describe fixed trait versus learnable skill, EQ versus IQ, is the core and the crust. So if you think about personality, your core disposition and temperament, you can think of that as the core. That remains relatively stable over time. Now we have crust, emotional intelligence, a learnable skill. It mediates between the fixed traits that we have and the world. It mediates between the hard skills that we have and the world. Tim, tell us about this one. This is probably my favorite description.
Right. So if you think about the role of emotional intelligence, your emotional intelligence is your delivery system. So if you take, so let's think about IQ. So look at IQ here on this chart. IQ, we're going to define in the broad sense of the word, meaning all of your skills, your experience, your knowledge, your competency. You need a delivery system for that so that you can deliver value and impact. Emotional intelligence becomes your delivery system. It becomes your conduit of influence that then leads to performance. So this is really the cause and effect chain in a very basic sense. Your IQ plus your EQ equals performance. But what if you have someone that has an underdeveloped emotional intelligence? What does that mean? That means that their delivery system is not developed and they're going to have a hard time conveying and delivering the value that they are able to create. They're going to have a hard time delivering that.
I love this definition. It looks like some in the chat do as well. But for me, this really connected the first time I looked at emotional intelligence this way, because it made me think about my own delivery system. How am I delivering my hard skills? How am I delivering my personality? And how am I massaging some of those things so that it lands best when I'm working with other people? So let's move along here to a piece of the conversation that I think is really interesting. If you look at the previous definitions that we went through, and I hope you were paying attention to those, uh, the models that come out of those definitions are really interesting. So the EQ space is an assessment space. Many of you have probably taken an emotional intelligence assessment. If you have, go ahead and put in the chat which one you've taken. I'd be interested to see. But each of those assessments is built on some sort of model, some sort of framework that describes or tries to explain how emotional intelligence works. So if you go back to those definitions, most of them, if not all of them, talk about two things: perceptions and behavior. So Tim, tell us about those two. Unpack those for us. What does that mean?
Right. So for 30 years, the conceptual framework for emotional intelligence has included perceptions and behavior. Perceptions refer to your awareness. And as we all know, with emotional intelligence, there's an internal domain and an external domain. So perceptions would include self-awareness and social awareness. And then in the behavioral domain, it would include self-management and social management. So self-management would be self-regulation, self-control. Social management would be your ability to influence others. This is the basic conceptual framework that we've now been using for more than 30 years, Junior, but it's deficient. There's actually a big flaw in it.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So you'll see that circle, the outline with the question marks. We would love if you could try and guess what goes in that circle. So I'm going to go through some of the prevailing models and talk about these. And I want everyone to keep an eye out or an ear out for the problem with these models. See if you can get to the answer before we do. And the question here is not to be overly critical. That's not the intent. It's an attempt to build upon a lot of great work that's been done in the past, right, Tim? Because the problem with the past is not a problem of what they've included, right?
That's right. It's a matter of what we have not included that
Yep.
needs to be added. And so we acknowledge the incredible work of all of the researchers and scholars from the past and practitioners that have taken us to where we are. And now we're going to have the opportunity to add to that.
Yep. So Goleman's model: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management. And you'll see these models, most of them fit very squarely into perceptions and behavior. Mesquite: perceiving emotions, using emotions, understanding emotions, and managing emotions. EQI 2.0: self-perception, self-expression, self-regulation, empathy, and social skills. So, what's absent? Well, here's the issue: behavior is symptomatic. There's something going on that precedes behavior. And here's an interesting question: is it just information? Is that all that's going on before we act, before we behave? Is that the only thing that precedes? What are the antecedents to behavior? Tim, what do you think? What is it? Just information? Is that all that's happening before it evolves into behavior?
Well, let's go back and look at the old model or the prevailing model that we've had for 30 years. We have perceptions and then we have behavior. That's all. That's not the only antecedent to behavior. So that brings us to this very important point, Junior.
So here's another angle that's particularly interesting: the dark side of charisma. I want to read a quote from Adam Grant. New evidence suggests that when people have self-serving motives, emotional intelligence becomes a weapon for manipulating others. This is a really important, and it's probably the most widespread critique of emotional intelligence as it stands based on the traditional model. Because if you look at this traditional model one more time, perceptions and behavior, what does this model allow for? This model allows for this, for manipulation. You could have all of the information available to you. You could be highly aware. And then you could also be very effective in the behavioral domain of the actions interacting with other people. But you could also be manipulative. So, this is the problem in defining emotional intelligence as the ability to recognize, understand, and manage emotions. What do you think, Tim?
No, it's right. So what we're saying is that the traditional models do not control for this manipulative tendency. How many of you, for example, know someone that is full of charisma, magnetism, style, dash? They're interpersonally quite skilled, but their motivation, their intent is selfish. And they see people as a means rather than an end. That's what we're talking about.
A lot of agreement in the chat.
Yeah.
We've seen this. And some of you are poking at it. You're getting right on the money as to what we're looking for, right? We're
Yeah.
kind of leading you on here. So here is what is conspicuously absent from the traditional view: beliefs. What you believe. What are we missing? Motivation. That's what we're missing. We're missing the driving force behind our action. Beliefs. It's what causes us to initiate, to persist, and to stop certain behaviors. It's influenced by our needs, our desires, our goals. Motivation is important. So, emotional intelligence, in our opinion, doesn't have two components, it has three. This is the future of emotional intelligence: beliefs. So, let's dive a little bit deeper into that. Tim, anything you want to say on this slide?
Well, let's go back to what we said. Behavior is symptomatic. It's symptomatic of your perceptions, but it's also symptomatic of your beliefs, right? Your behavior is refracted through the prism of your beliefs. There's no way to understand your behavior very well unless we understand what you believe, which then becomes the source of your motivation and your intent in your actions.
So, one thing that I'd be interested to ask the audience is whether or not you believe that someone's or your own beliefs affect behavior. And if so, how? I'd be really interested to see what you think about this. 100%, says Christina. Absolutely. Of course, 100%. 100%. Yes. Core beliefs drive everything. Yes, for sure. I agree. Yes, of course. Okay.
Junior, let me give you an example. So
Yeah.
this is on the negative side. Okay. Humans are dripping with bias. What is a bias? A bias is a belief or a preference. Now, there are positive biases and there are negative biases. For example, I love Korean barbecue. That's a bias that I have, and I really love it. Oh, it's positive. A negative bias, we also have negative biases. A negative bias, which is a belief, leads to prejudice, which is a feeling about that belief, which leads to discrimination, which is a behavior that links back to that belief. So do you see the connection that goes from bias to prejudice to discrimination? This is how humans work. So to think that we have been leaving out the component of beliefs in the conceptual model of emotional intelligence, we can see that we've had a big gap. We can see that we have not been controlling for manipulative tendencies.
Well, that's what's so interesting to me about asking this question to the audience, because almost everyone, I can't read every single entry, but it seems pretty unanimous that we believe that our beliefs affect our behavior. So this is fascinating. If we are convinced that our beliefs affect our behavior and emotional intelligence is about human interaction, then why has beliefs not been a part of EQ? That's
Yeah,
so mysterious to me. It's a head scratcher to me.
it is. It really
For
is.
for as many decades as we have done this,
Yeah.
to not have that baked in to all of the core models is really interesting to me. So here, let's go to the next slide, and we want to go even further. So this is the actual language that we use when we're talking about this belief domain. Now, we use the word regard. Emotional intelligence has internal and external application. You'll see this in almost every model. So there's a component of emotional intelligence that has to do with you, and there's a component of EQ that has to do with other people. So we create three companionship competencies. The first companion competency is regard. This relates to the belief we have about ourselves and regard for others, as well as the intent we carry to both ourselves and other people. And so these regard domains probe really deeply into the motivations behind the behavior. So, Tim, tell me about this word regard. You could have chosen, any word. There are a lot of options. Why regard?
Well, it's used in the research literature, so there's some precedent for it. And as you said, Junior, regard refers to the way that you value something, the way that you esteem something. And so the first internal domain, it's about yourself. How do you value yourself? How do you esteem yourself? Right? And then social regard, how do you value and esteem others? Have you ever, for example, here's an example. Have you ever had a conversation with a teenager who is struggling with their self concept? They don't have confidence. They don't like themselves. When you're talking to them, what do they do? Go to your chat if you have a comment. What do they do? If you're having a conversation, what behaviorally, what do they do? What are they likely to do? Avoid eye contact. That's exactly right, Jennifer. The first thing that you'll see is they avoid eye contact. There's the connection between self regard and behavior. That's just one simple example. Let me give you another example. What if you're dealing with a senior leader in an organization that has very low social regard, meaning the way that they value and esteem others? How do they interact in a meeting? So let's say we have a CEO and we're in a meeting and he has very low social regard. What does that steamroll? That's right. So that CEO is going to be dismissive, not inclusive, loud. Yes, lots of bluster, lots of bravado, commandeering the meeting, maybe toxic, right? Because they don't value and esteem their colleagues the way that they should. They're not giving them the appropriate amount of dignity and respect. So, do you see the direct connection between social regard and behavior, right? So, there again, there are just a couple of examples there, Junior.
Yeah, I want to call out a few more of these. Roll over others' ideas, deflection, dismissive, loud and bullyish, puff up, take over, talk over others, dominating, use their power to shut others down, talk at you, not inclusive. They cancel out others, push their own views, predatory self esteem. That's interesting. Domineering, directive, don't read the room. So think about all of the things we would miss all of this
Yeah.
if we didn't consider social regard.
Yeah. So, Junior, I'll give you another example. I worked with a senior leader who scored very high on an emotional intelligence assessment. And yet, this person had borderline narcissistic personality disorder. But it wasn't captured in the assessment at all. This person was interpersonally very skilled, very smooth, lots of charm. So do you see how desperately we need to be able to measure self-regard and social regard?
Jill says, I know that person. So here's a question that I would like for us to answer in the chat. Have you ever met the opposite? Someone with very, very high social regard. How did they treat you? How did you know that they had high social regard? What evidence did you have behaviorally?
Behaviorally, that's it. Wow. Welcoming, active listening, humility,
They listened, lead
curiosity.
with respect,
Mm-hmm.
engaged. It made you feel valued, like I was the most important person. Sarah, thanks for that. Appreciation for effort and warmth. Paula, quality time. Michael, humility. Lena, significant empathy. Humility, respect, mutual honor. They asked and listened. Open and accepting, deferential. One who seeks dissenting views. Emily, yes, my old boss, they cared about me as a person more than an employee. They were interesting because they were interested in me. Andrew, that's great. Vicky,
That's beautiful.
curiosity, encouraging, facilitating, like my dog does, wagging the tail constantly, curious listener. They're accommodating, actively listen, empathetic. So think about those experiences. They're standout experiences. Those types of experiences stick with us.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in order for us to more effectively lead others, should we not lean into these types of behaviors and include them in the evaluations that we do of ourselves, of others, in screening processes? Think about hiring and promotion.
Right.
We should look at these areas. So, the second companion domain, we have awareness. And this refers to our perceptive capacity. So it includes both self-awareness and social awareness. They're separate but related domains. The third, management. So in the internal domain, self-management refers to one's regulatory capacity, the ability to self-govern. As it relates to other people, it refers to the ability to influence others in the context of interpersonal relationships. So I love the way that we've laid out the model, what you believe, what you know, what you do, as those three categories relate to yourself and other people. Tim, anything else you want to say about this slide?
Well, just to emphasize the distinction that you made, Junior, for management, for the management domain, self-management is self-control, self-regulation. Social management is all about influence. We don't control others, we influence. That means we're staying away from manipulation at one end and coercion at the other end, right? That's where you get into pathology when it comes to social management. So we're going to stay away from manipulation. We're going to stay away from coercion.
So the way that most of these models work, and you've probably seen this in the past, you have these big competencies or domains or components. And then you have pieces that live beneath those subconstructs. So we're going to go to the next slide to show you how we break down to the next level all of the skills that comprise the 6 domains. So inside self-regard, we have independence, optimism, self-respect, confidence, motivation, self-awareness. You can see all of these. I won't go through all of them. But what's important to understand is that behaviorally, there are things that live at a lower level than at the level of the domain. We need to act with more specificity, which is why we go a level deeper. So the full model includes 6 domains and 30 skills. Tim, any of these that you want to call out or focus on in particular?
Sure. So if you go to social awareness, for example, and you look at listening and questioning, there's a direct link, again, between social regard and listening and questioning. For example, as I'm working with senior leaders, many of them have been socialized, deeply socialized to what I would call an imperial model of leadership. And they think that they need to be the repository of answers. And so they can't stop talking. And they haven't made the transition to a collaborative, inclusive model of leadership. When you make that transition, how are you leading? You're leading more through inquiry. You're leading more through questions. You're less directive. You still hold people accountable, but the way you interact is much different. So I want you to think about that transition from the imperial model of leadership to an inclusive, collaborative model of leadership, and how that is manifest in listening and questioning, just that skill.
I want to point to social regard and look at some of the parallels between the way that you described those people we asked about who treated you a certain way that you thought had high social regard. So think about all of those entries here in the chat about understanding, about inclusivity, about inspiration, curiosity. Now look at the skills for social regard: compassion, empathy, respect, interest, and social efficacy. So how many entries did we see in the chat about they were interested in me? They were interested in my life. They asked me how I was doing. They were curious as to what was going on. So you can see the links, the ties behaviorally, those that have high social regard and the things that they do every day that help you feel that they care. And it should go without saying, but we will more likely follow and be positively influenced by those who behave the way that we described than those who manipulate and do the types of things that we described in, a few questions back.
Yeah.
Okay. So here is a tie-in that we want to spend a few minutes on. Let's take a quick look at this. So many of you have worked with Leader Factor in psychological safety. You might wonder how this fits in. After all, haven't we been talking about psychological safety for the last several years? We have the 4 stages, Culture by Design podcast. We have the 4 stages team survey with PS Index. So why EQ? Well, here's the core logic. EQ lives at the level of the individual. It is an individual metric. Psychological safety lives at the level of the group. This is something that has not been touched on in the literature, at least to our knowledge. This is something they live pretty separately, emotional intelligence and psychological safety, at least in the research. But we have seen this tie. It's so stark to us. EQ at the individual level leads to psychological safety in groups, which leads to career impact for the individual and business impact for the organization. So in the chat, can you see this tie? Does this make sense? For me, it's kind of a light bulb when we first started grappling with this. Like, oh, this makes sense. It makes sense now. Because if you deconstruct psychological safety, what are you left with? An individual. A team is just comprised of a bunch of individuals that are interacting together. So if you put that emotional intelligence together, now we get psychological safety. What do you think, Tim?
No, it's true. So think about this. Emotional intelligence, what is the unit of analysis and the unit of performance? As you said, Junior, it is the individual. Psychological safety, what is the unit of analysis and the unit of performance? It is the group. So emotional intelligence becomes the primary enabling skill that creates psychological safety as a condition at the team level for a social collective of any kind.
So here's another way to put this. Psychological safety is the collective emotional intelligence of the team. So this is about as concisely as we can put it. Now, we can't wrap up all the detail in a single sentence, but this should help us see the connection. If you look at a group of people that has really low psychological safety, chances are that there is an EQ problem somewhere in there.
Right.
And chances also are that there's an EQ problem at the level of the leader. And so we know that these things work together. There's push and pull, and you can come at it from either direction. You can work on psychological safety, break it down into EQ. You can work on EQ up to the level of psychological safety in groups. So we wanted to call out this connection because it's been very useful to us as we've done development initiatives and training with our clients and as we approached assessment. Okay, so what is the future of emotional intelligence? The topic of our conversation today. The future of EQ is a future that's more human. It's a future that includes intent. And historically and ironically, it hasn't, which we believe is a big problem. So our goal is to bring to market training and assessment that solves the problem. So let's talk about that. EQ index. For years, we've been using an assessment instrument with our clients that hasn't been available to the public. And Tim, we created the first EQ instrument how long ago?
10 years ago.
10 years ago.
10 years. Mm-hmm.
So we've been using an assessment tool, and over time, we've gathered more data. We've made revisions. We've revamped the technology. And as of today, we're very proud to introduce EQ Index. It is the most accurate and practical assessment tool available. It's 150 items. It's very comprehensive, but it's rapid response. So the average completion time is close to 15 minutes. And we also have an action planning capability built into the product, which is another interesting thing that's conspicuously absent a lot of the time. Why would you have an assessment with no way to debrief or to get better? So we use the 5P action planning methodology. We're also introducing today a 360 multi-rater version, which is the best 360 I have ever seen. I debriefed just a couple of them yesterday, and I've seen or used almost every one there is. Now, you're probably expecting what at this point? You're probably expecting me to sell this to you, right? That's what it sounds like. Sounds like a big pitch. This is our lead up to the big pitch where now I'm going to ask for your money. We're not going to do that today.
No, we're not.
So for everyone in the webinar today, we are going to make EQ Index available to all of you for free.
Yeah.
For free. What's included? Our full 150 item assessment, full reporting, unabridged.
Yeah, it's not a watered down
resources.
version, Junior.
This is not a light version.
No.
We could have done that.
This is the full version.
Video resources that will teach you more about emotional intelligence and will walk you through the creation of a personal action plan aimed to help you improve your emotional intelligence over time. It has the 5P action planning baked in. This is the most comprehensive, accurate, and actionable tool on the market. I can say that with every confidence in the world. We understand this area well, and we're excited to bring this to you. We appreciate you. We appreciate the work that you do in the world, and we hope that this will be valuable to you. There's no catch. There's no gotcha. This is free for you. Here's what we ask in return. You don't have to do this, but take it, do the work, improve your emotional intelligence. And if you like it, tell us and tell others. If you get it, if you use it and you like it, please share your experience on LinkedIn and tag Leader Factor. We'll choose 5 of those who do that to get a free seat to our half-day EQ Index workshop led by Dr. Tim Clark. It's half day of a deep dive of some of the things that we've gone through today, but in a lot more detail. So for all of you, leaderfactor.com/free. Leaderfactor.com/free. You can enter your information into the form fill. You'll get an email inviting you to the platform to take the assessment. You'll be able to do your results. You can do this as we speak. Now, that will be available to you. What was on the slide? Until Monday, February 26th at midnight. So if you're running off to another meeting or whatever the case may be, don't worry. You've got till Monday at midnight, midnight Mountain Time to take your assessment.
Junior, I just want to call out our technology team and our design team that have worked so hard to launch this. They've done an incredible job. The technology platform is absolutely state of the art. The reporting is beautiful, isn't it? It's just beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, we've worked very hard on this. So shout out to the entire Leader Factor team, the product team, the development team, the marketing team, the CS team, the sales team, everybody at Leader Factor has been working on this and behind the scenes. And so we're excited to finally be able to share this with you because we have been hard at work.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we will go ahead and move into the Q&A. So it looks like we've got quite a few questions living here in the Q&A. If you have questions about the giveaway or any of that, I'm sure that there will be some of the moderators in the chat from the Leader Factor team that will help you with your questions. And of course, you can always reach out to us directly if you're having any issues getting the email or whatever the case may be. So if you go to leaderfactor.com, you'll find a whole bunch of stuff there, leaderfactor.com/resources. And if you haven't tuned in the podcast, we'd invite you to. It's a place that you can engage with us. It's a weekly cadence, and we think it will be valuable to you. Do not forget to take your assessment. Don't forget the giveaway, leaderfactor.com/free. If you liked today's webinar, please subscribe to our newsletter as well. We put that out on Wednesdays, and that is a synthesis of a lot of the content that we will have curated or created throughout the week. So thank you again. We appreciate you very much and for all the work you do in the world. And with that, we'll wrap up. Tim, any final thoughts?
No, thanks very much for spending an hour with us. Great to have you from all over the world. Our best wishes to you.
Yep. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.